10:30, so I'm going to go ahead and get started. Good morning, everybody. Hope you are all doing well. I'm Donna.
Sorry,
Governor.
Donna, could I introduce you?
University of North Georgia. This is my second year in higher education. I moved up last year from K-12. Started my career teaching kindergarten in 1984, which is where I started using songs from. Which is when I started using songs. I knew that when I taught kindergarten that songs worked very well. I eventually moved to middle school and didn't know you weren't supposed to use songs. So I started looking, and sure enough, there were a lot of really good songs, and started putting them into my curriculum. When I started working on my dissertation, I realized this is what I wanted to research and what I wanted to research for my PhD. There wasn't much out there, and that was one of the things I ran into, that there was very little research existing on using science, songs with science, or in school at all. The early studies came from Schoolhouse Rock. There was a couple other studies, but pretty much very little was secondary education, and almost no existing research with using science-based songs for teaching science. So I did a pilot study and then moved on to my dissertation research. My research questions involved how teachers use science content music in the curriculum, how can it be used as a teaching strategy, and then what does the experience of both students and teachers suggest about its potential for teaching and learning science. I decided for my methodology to use multiple case study research. It seemed to be the best application that would work for me, in that it, hang on a second, I'm having some difficulties here. It's 10:32. In that it seemed to be the best methodology because I was looking at what the experience was. I wasn't looking to see whether or not students looked better, learned better or worse with it, but how it could be used to engage students and whether or not it was a viable teaching strategy to employ in the classroom. So the theoretical framework I used was constructivism, and that students construct their knowledge and understanding based on their experiences. So I was really looking at the phenomena and at the experience that it provided for students. According to all the recommendations, 4 to 10 cases was ideal. And a term that came up in the research on multiple case study research was quintain. And the quintain is basically the common concept or the thing that you're trying to observe. And so that word came up, and you're going to see that throughout my research coming in too. I chose middle school classrooms because of where I was teaching. This is what I was doing. I wanted to look at both the teacher and the student perspective and the use of science songs, and see how they were being used, how students were responding, how they were interacting with it, and what they felt about it. I recruited from the district in which I was teaching at. I was trying to go between 4 to 10, which seemed like the ideal number. Ended up initially enrolling 7 teachers, and one basically dropped out very early. So I ended up with a total of 6 teachers in classrooms, 2 from 6th grade, 1 from 7th, and 3 from 8th grade across the district. According to the research, you do not want to use random sampling. You really need an opportunity to observe what you're trying to observe. So it was basically purposeful cases selection. In other words, everybody who volunteered got included in the study. The data sources that I used teacher interviews. I did 3 interviews with each of the teachers. I did classroom observations, and I did student focus groups. And each one of those observation strategies was related to a particular research question. This gave me enough research in order to triangulate my research and to look at how I had multiple research sources or data sources informing each of these research questions. So the research went through the process of both getting consent and IRB approval. I then had to recruit teachers, and then I had to have an orientation with them as well as an initial interview in order to try to figure out what their thoughts were. As it turned out, none of the 6 teachers really had any experience using science songs in order to teach content. It was new to all of them. So I had this initial meeting. I asked them each to do 2 lessons during the course of the semester in which they would use songs over that semester. I said, just 2, it's all you got to do, use songs, but I said you have to do something with them. And that was my initial requirement and something that came out of the pilot study. You've got to do something where students are interacting with the song and doing some sort of a lyric analysis activity. I went in and then observed each of the classrooms with using the science songs. I tried to do this during the second song so that they had some experience first. And then after that, which I held a focus group. There were 57 students involved, 9 particular focus groups with 4 to 9 students each, and they were recruited by giving them each a CD. The teachers also were given a selection of CDs. They were given about 4 CDs each with the ability to get more, as well as they were each given a book on how to use songs for teaching to give them ideas. Then I had a second interview with each teacher in which I talked to them about the student focus group and what had occurred and to get their feedback on that. And then the third and final interview was at the end of the semester in which we talked about how they felt like it had helped their teaching. So for each of these 6 cases, I did a data analysis, which was the interview. And that interview was taking the interviews and transcribing them, as well as the focus group interviews. I used an inductive open coding method for analyzing the transcripts. I made analytic memos. I identified the themes for each individual teacher that came out through the coding of their transcripts and for each case. So then I went back and presented those to each of the teachers and asked for them to check for validity. And kind of a little note here about the songs that they used. They were asked to choose the songs based on the content and that they were using. And so this made this a little bit more challenging in that they had to find the songs. So one of the things that had been done is my husband, who goes by Professor Boggs, had actually written a CD of songs that were content-based, and those songs were tied to the content we knew that was being taught during the semester. And so he had written the songs with some inputs from some of the teachers earlier, had produced the CD, and so most of the songs actually came from that, but not all of them. That was just where most of them had come from. So that just needs to be stated out there. Some of them chose some other songs, but because those aligned with the content, and some of the teachers had had some input into what content was included, that's where most of them came from. So the first case is, I'm going to talk briefly about each of the 6 different cases. And the first one is Derek Martin. Derek Martin was a teacher who was teaching physical science at the 8th grade level. He had 12 years of experience. He chose atom shack, some kind of energy, and conduction, convection, radiation. He had his students make mini posters with the content. The things that came out of this is that the songs helped build an understanding of scientific terms. They had a lot of content in a short period of time. They used lots of explanations and examples. And one of the things that he had said to me was that it was like having a second teacher in the classroom, that it explained things to kids in a different way. And that they were much easier to use. In fact, he was pretty not certain about how this was going to work. He almost kind of did this as a favor to me. And out of this, he said that he was really, he's felt like that it may not be as successful as it was, but he said his kids loved it and it really helped them develop conceptual understandings. The next teacher involved is Sandy Kingston. She was a 6th grade teacher in her 10th year of teaching, and this was Earth Systems. And she actually did some really creative things with turning conduction, convection, radiation song into a dance on heat transfer. And she talked about how the students thought that it improved their test scores, that it was active learning, that the earworms would engage students longer. It was a great study strategy, that it was, she used terms kind of like an instructional contagion, that it just really, the kids all got excited and kind of built the energy in her classroom. Third teacher was Martha Russell. She was also a 6th grade earth science teacher. with 14 years of teaching experience. And she also used the rock cycle, tectonics rocks, conduction, convection, radiation. And she thought that the songs help students visualize the concepts and enhance their vocabulary. It was a great mnemonic device, and that the repetition really helped them build ownership. The fourth teacher was Betty Taylor, who was another 8th grade physical science teacher. And she was also pretty negative from the beginning. She had not used songs before, and really came out of this thinking that this was really a great teaching strategy. She really talked about the language involved and the language of science. We all know that teaching science involves a very specialized vocabulary, and felt like it really helped them build their ability to talk and provide discourse in scientific language. She felt like it gave her an opportunity to address some misconceptions, and that it really helped connect ideas and organize student knowledge. The fifth one was Anna Darcy, and she was in her 18th year. She was my only 7th grade life science teacher. She used a number of songs. She went far and above the 2 that I asked her to use. And she felt like the songs really told stories, and that really the social cultural aspect really engaged students, and that it allowed through an emphasis of the concepts through repetition. And the final one was Max Cantor, and he was a 9th year teacher in 8th grade, and he used 2 songs, some kind of energy, conduction, convection, and radiation. And he felt like it allowed alternative explanations and examples. They were content rich, and the novelty engaged the students. So once I pulled all of these 6 cases and did the thematic analysis, I then had to pull them together into a cross-case analysis and look at how each of the themes that came through in each of these individual cases worked together with each other, and would allow me to make some assertions based on similar themes appearing in multiple cases. So the common characteristics was that they could actually, of all the songs, is that the state standards provided the instructional framework, so there were some common songs used. Not all students really liked learning with songs. I actually had one of the 57 tell me that she would rather learn from the textbook. The multiple case study analysis then allowed me to synthesize the findings, and here's kind of a research table, and I'll break these down briefly for you. The first assertion is that it really can help, use of science songs can really help students build scientific vocabulary. That the language used and the vocabulary used in the songs, if it's the scientific vocabulary, it really can help kids take ownership of it. The kids can learn to talk science and that involves a specialized structure and language. Second assertion is that the songs will also help build content and understanding of science concepts. And they do this through a number of different ways. They present material in a slightly different way. It was like having a second teacher in the classroom, that it gave different examples. It used a number of other terms that they might not have had from their teacher. It basically helped develop symbolic language through symbolic language. The concept of repetition with variation helped build that conceptual understanding. From the student perspective, songs really helped provide novelty and variety in the learning environment. The kids loved coming in and having songs. It made learning more fun, and they said that anytime learning is more fun, they're going to pay more attention and become more involved in it. It was also a great hook to get kids interested early in the learning process. The other thing kids talked about was that the songs work as great mnemonic aids that help students learn. It talked about how the information is stored and retrieved, and that if you look at the brain-based learning and how that works, that information is stored, the amygdala is activated when you get emotionally involved in your learning, and that this would do that. And then the fact that earworms were embedded, it would all of a sudden, the kids would be thinking about these songs longer and more. So that the fact that they're mnemonic devices aided the kids, and they felt like that was very, very helpful for them. From a social-cultural perspective, that music is, there's a social-cultural appeal for students, that students are really this digital age, kids are walking around with their tunes in their ears all the time. And this says something to the kids when the teachers use songs about, hey, you know, I know something about you and I know what you think about music. And so you're trying to speak to me in a way that we understand. And so there's that social cultural appeal of music. And finally, that when you're using songs for learning, you've got to have a lyric analysis activity. That if you're just hearing the songs peripherally, that you're not actually getting into the meaning and what they mean and how they and how what the words are. What the words are trying to say in the communication. So in order for songs to be effective, you really have to have a lyric analysis activity that helps connect the ideas and can build conceptual understanding. These are sense-making activities in which kids are really getting in there, digging in and saying, what do they mean and how do they affect my learning? So out of this came implications for the classroom instruction. That there is a social cultural appeal of music, and for teachers to use it tells kids that that they're trying to appeal to what they know the kids value. That working with science songs is a great sense-making activity. The more ways that science content is presented, the more opportunities students have to connect ideas. And they also work in the same way that Banalauer on effective classroom, his piece on effective classroom instruction describes interactive lectures. So they can actually work that way. They're also a conceptual scaffold. It helps kids with key ideas and build understanding of key ideas and vocabulary, and as analogies and puns are embedded in the songs, and it can be engaging. So as far as the implications for science instruction, there are a number of implications in terms of what we should do as science educators. So they should be considered as a viable teaching strategy that can be used to help kids make sense of learning. In secondary education, very often science songs are not considered to be a viable teaching strategy. They're considered to be just a mnemonic device. And from a conceptual understanding, a lot of instructors don't realize that they actually can build conceptual understanding. So they're more important than just using as a mnemonic device. As far as one of the questions that came out in the data is when I talked to teachers were really interested in talking about building conceptual understanding. Kids never got that. All they felt like they were talking about learning from was a recall. What do they know and can they answer questions on the test? And while the kids felt like the songs did that for them, they never talked about conceptual understanding. Teachers talked about conceptual understanding in using songs, but they never really talked about kids actually being able to recall information from for a test from a song. So I think that that's really worthy of further study. Why do we have a perceived difference in what learning is? Further research would be suggested would be looking at our specific songs, types of knowledge that songs are most useful for. Are there measurable learning differences when students use song for learning? And that would be more quantitative. So the conclusions that I came up with are basically that songs do have a variety of uses at different levels of learning, and they have potential to enhance student understanding of concepts in many different ways. It has implications tied to best practices and research-based practices to help students build conceptual understanding. That the lyric analysis activities are a great conceptual scaffold. That science music has implications for instruction from multiple learning theories, and that can be used effectively for conceptual development when implemented in a sense-making concept. So my 20 minutes are almost up, but if you're interested in reading more, the results were published in the International Journal of Science Education in 2012. While there's a lot of other pieces that have been published prior to this about using songs, this is one of the first, I believe, in using science content-based songs to help students learn. So at this time, I'm going to turn it over to the person who's next.